Right from childhood, our textbooks taught us to use BC before Christ and AD to mark historical years like 2025 AD or 30 BC and so on. But why is before Christ wrong? Why is AD historically inaccurate? And why has the world moved away from the system towards BCE, which is before Common Era, and CE, Common Era? In this video, we will break down exactly why before Christ failed, scientifically, historically, and theologically, which I mean religiously. By all aspects, it is incorrect and is rejected. We'll see why this calendar structure contains fundamental inaccuracies. And before we begin, a brief disclaimer. We fully respect the religious beliefs and traditions and sentiments of people from all communities. Nothing here is meant to discredit or disrespect any faith. Our goal is simply to present, from a Bharatiya standpoint and global historical standpoint, why the world once adopted BC AD system but now rejected it and moved beyond that, not as a standard but more as a convention, a non-scientific convention. Thank you for watching this video with an open mind, and let's get started. Before we get into the main topic, there is one simple but very critical question that you must ask. If an entire calendar system is built around Jesus, whom Christians believe as their God, then we would expect that system to be scientifically accurate and religiously consistent. But here is the basic question. Christmas, which is believed to be, I repeat, believed to be the birthday of Jesus, is fixed on December 25th every year. Yet Easter, which marks his death and the belief of Christians that he rose up after 3 days. This Easter keeps changing every year. If one day connected to his birth is fixed, then why is the date connected to his death shifting every year? How can a calendar centered on Jesus have such a fundamental inconsistency? This is the question we must ask. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why this happens and what it reveals about the inaccuracies of the BC AD system. Let's move forward. And to the point that BC AD system is inaccurate or inconsistent, it is not my personal opinion. After India's independence in 1955, the government of India constituted a calendar reform committee. Even then, scholars and policymakers clearly recognized the inconsistencies and inaccuracies with this before Christ AD system, a system that has been colonially imposed on Bharat. At the same time, India needed to remain connected with the rest of the world, but that did not mean abandoning the traditional calendrical heritage of Bharat. In fact, Nehru, the then Prime Minister, explicitly stated in this committee's mandate that the BC AD system was flawed and that Bharat needed a standardized national calendar rooted in our own Bharatiya traditions. This is not an accusation, this is not a personal interpretation, this is a documented fact. Now let's begin the actual story. Time computation is one of the oldest and most fundamental achievements of human civilization. The Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Persians, Greeks, Africans, the people of Bharat, the Chinese, every great civilization developed its own sophisticated ways of tracking days, nights, months, seasons, and years. Each culture built its own worldview and scientific understanding around the time. That is why the very idea of dividing time based on the religious beliefs of a single community, calling before Christ and Anno Domini, is fundamentally inappropriate to impose on rest of the world. Every civilization deserves respect for its own contributions, discoveries, and traditions. And especially in Bharat, we have a long-standing and far more advanced system of calendrical science and time computation, rooted in astronomy, Bharatiya Jyotisha Shastra, Ganita Shastra, and we still have that cultural continuity. And so in this video, we stay respectful to all great civilizations that mastered the art of time long before any externally imposed calendrical systems even took birth. So put things simply, for starters, BC and AD split all of history around the believed birth of Jesus Christ. BC means before Christ, everything that happened before he was born. AD means Anno Domini in Latin, or in the year of Lord, counting the years after his birth. So 2025 AD means 2025 years elapsed after Jesus was born. If the entire timeline of history is divided as before Jesus and after Jesus, then the most natural place to look for clear dates would be the Bible itself. But when we try to open and read Bible, we find that it gives no precise timeline about Jesus' birth. It only says that Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the days of Herod, the king of Judea. Herod ruled for many years, so this gives no fixed or dependable date for the birth at all. Forget about the date, not even year. Now, coming to the death of Jesus, the Bible is slightly clearer. It links the event of the death of Jesus to the Passover an ancient and well documented Jewish festival. It says that the crucifixion happened after 2 days is the Passover. So the Bible provides zero precise reference about the birth of Jesus, but a festival based reference for his death. This already shows that BC AD system is built on historical uncertainty and not on clear scriptural dating or even a reference. Christians believe that Jesus rose from the dead on the third day of his crucifixion, and this event is what they celebrate as Easter. The Bible links the crucifixion to Passover, a very ancient Jewish festival, like I said, and Passover itself is tied to the spring season. And over time, Christian tradition aligned Easter with the astronomical events around the spring equinox, the day when night and day are of equal length, hence equinox. So here is how the rule works. Easter is celebrated on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So this helps determine the day of the Good Friday, the day when Jesus died, and the day of the Easter, which Christians believe that he rose from the dead. And this calculation depends on the equinox and the full moon, both astronomical events. Hence the date of Easter moves every year. But then why not the birth? Like I said, 25th of December by no means is the birth of Jesus. It was just an attributed date, and there is ample amount of research, and you can just try to learn for yourself and you'll understand that December 25th by no means is the date of birth of Jesus. It is just an attributed date and an already existing Roman festival that is absorbed into Christianity to make conversions easy. Now let's talk briefly about the Romans, because their culture and religious context is essential to understanding how the Western calendrical system evolved. The Romans worshipped the broader Indo-European pantheon, gods like Jupiter, who corresponds to Zeus in Greek pantheon, and then Diauspiter mentioned in the Rig Veda. To be clear, these are not Hindu deities in modern sense, but they reflect a shared Indo-European cultural heritage where ancient India and Europe had strikingly similar religious ideas rooted in the Vedic-like traditions. In Rig Veda, Diauspiter is not a major deity. He is one among the Ashtavasus, the elemental gods, but in Rome, Diauspiter eventually became Jupiter and is the supreme deity, the king of the gods. Roman kings and emperors were often seen as ruling under divine sanction, sometimes even considered descendants or representatives of Jupiter himself. If you look at these ancient Roman coins, you will see Zeus or Jupiter and the temple of Zeus depicted prominently. This shows how central the thunder god Jupiter was in the Roman worldview, which influenced how Romans interpreted kingship, authority, and even timekeeping. Now, we don't go deep into the Roman history, but we need to understand one extremely important and unfortunate chapter, the period when Jews were persecuted under the Roman Empire. Between 66 CE and 135 CE, for nearly around 70 years, Jews faced repeated revolts, wars, and brutal suppression. Why did this happen? Well, Judaism is the oldest of the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It is also the mother religion of Christianity. Jesus himself was a Jew. But unlike later religions, Judaism was a closed, non-proselytizing, which means they did not convert people into Judaism. They were just a closed group. Jews worshipped their own God, Yahweh, and followed their own laws. They did not worship the Roman emperor, nor did they participate in the broader Roman religious culture. And to Romans, religion and state authority were deeply connected. Representing the emperor and the Roman gods was seen as loyalty to the empire itself. The Jewish refusal to worship the emperor or assimilate into the Roman religious life was viewed not just as difference, but as a rebellion, even treason. So this clash was not about who was right or wrong. It was a fundamental cultural collision, a monotheistic, exclusive faith that could not blend with a vast polytheistic imperial culture. And because of this, Jews were repeatedly persecuted under Roman rule. Around the same period, but for a much longer duration, that is from 30 CE to 311 CE, the early Christians, who were originally Jews living under the Roman Empire, also faced persecution. The early followers began worshipping Jesus as their God, which immediately put them in conflict with Roman religious culture because they rejected the rest of the Roman pantheon. The underlying pattern was similar to what we discussed with Judaism. Christians, like Jews, rejected the divine authority of the emperor, refused to worship the Roman gods, and did not participate in the Roman religious traditions. To the Romans, this was not merely a difference of belief, it was a direct challenge to the imperial authority. There was, however, one key difference. Judaism was a closed group. people did not convert into Judaism easily. Christianity, on the other hand, was open and expanding. Anyone could become a Christian back then in the Roman culture or in the Roman civilization times. So from the Roman perspective, the potential for religious rebellion seemed much larger. This cultural and religious clash resulted in Christians being persecuted for almost 3 centuries, pretty much about 311 CE. The harshest phase of the Christian persecution under the Roman Empire was the Diocletianic Great Persecution, which started from 303 CE to 311 CE. Emperor Aurelius Diocletian, who ruled from 284 CE to 305 CE, ordered the most systematic and empire-wide suppression of Christians in Roman history. His decrees included destroying Christian scriptures, churches, and sacred sites, banning Christian worship and assemblies, arresting the clergy, which is like the religious teachers of the Christianity, and forcing them to sacrifice to Roman gods, imprisonment, torture, execution, whatnot. The Diocletian saw Christianity as a direct threat to Roman religious unity and imperial authority. His own coins, like the one shown here, depict Jupiter, the supreme Roman god, emphasizing the emperor's alignment with the traditional Roman divinity. Under his rule, thousands of Christians suffered. The year 284, I repeat the year 284 CE, when Diocletian ascended the throne, would later gain a very special significance, something we will understand shortly in this video itself. Now let's arrive at the most crucial point, Easter, that required a dependable calendar. The only event in Jesus' life with a clear astronomical reference is Easter, because it is tied to the spring equinox and the Jewish Passover. To calculate Easter accurately every year, early Christians needed a stable, scientific, astronomically aligned calendar. But the Roman system was completely unusable, the Roman timekeeping system, because it was dependent on regnal years, which means the reign of a particular king was counted as year 1, year 2, so on and so forth. So each new emperor restarted the count. When emperor changed, the era changed. There was no continuous astronomical timeline, nor a scientific foundation, no way to reliably track equinoxes or full moons. In short, it was impossible to compute Easter during the Roman calendar for future. Because of this, the responsibility naturally shifted to Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the ancient Christian world. Located in northern Africa, modern-day Egypt, Alexandria was home to the Coptic Church, the most scholarly Christian institution of that era. And again, the scholarship of the Coptic Church essentially comes from the ancient Egyptian scholarship, which was again very much aligned with the astronomical events in their time competition. Rejecting the Roman regnal system entirely, the Alexandrian scholars began a new era in 284 CE. Remember this year, the year Emperor Diocletian rose to the power. His reign triggered the most brutal persecutions of Christians, and to honor those who died, the Coptic Church named their new calendar, the first Christian calendar, as Anno Martyrium, the year of the martyrs. No AD, no BC, nothing. The world's first Christian calendar began not in Europe, but in Africa, in Alexandria, in the year 284 CE. For nearly 2 centuries, Christians across Egypt and North Africa followed Anno Martyrium, the first Christian calendar created in Alexandria. In fact, even today, the Coptic Church in Egypt does not use BC or AD. They still follow Anno Martyrium. But there was a discomfort. Why should the Christian era begin with Diocletian, Aurelius Diocletian, the emperor who unleashed the worst persecution of Christians in history? Honoring the martyrs is noble, but building the entire Christian timeline on the name of the man who tried to wipe Christianity out did not make sense for the wider Christian world. This is where Dionysius Exiguus enters the story around 470 CE. That's when he was born. A Roman monk and scholar, he was assigned a very technical task: calculate future Easter dates. That's all. His real job was mathematical, to generate Easter tables for upcoming centuries. And as an offshoot of it, also came a need to start the Christian calendar. That's to get to the birth year of Jesus, for which Bible does not provide any concrete evidence. Dionysius had no astronomical documents, no census records, no archaeological references. All he had was regnal lists. He relied on the regnal lists of the old manuscripts. basically which king ruled for how long, and finally get to the time period of King Herod, because Bible says that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod. So Dionysius managed to get to the birth year of Jesus and pointed it to 525 years in the past. Basically from the time of Dionysius, 525 years in the past was when Jesus was born. He arrived at a particular calculation, and then he fixed that year as Anno Domini, which is the year of the Lord, which is Jesus in his view. And that's how and when Anno Domini came into existence in the year 525 CE. By this point in history, Christianity had two different calendars. Number one, Anno Martyrium, the year of martyrs, created by the Coptic Church of Africa, the very first Christian calendar. And number two is Anno Domini, the year of Lord, created in Eastern Europe by Dionysius Exiguus. It's very important to understand one thing very clearly. Neither of these calendars were ever imposed on anyone. These calendrical systems were created only for internal Christian purposes, to estimate when Jesus might have been born, and more importantly, to calculate Easter every year for liturgical observances like fasting and worship, etc. They never intend to override world history or redefine global chronology. That never happened. These were devotional tools, not imperial mandates. And at this stage, this was absolutely no issue whatsoever. However, there was one major problem in the work of Dionysius Exiguus. While calculating Anno Domini, the supposed year of Jesus' birth, Dionysius relied on biblical hints, especially the line, what you're seeing here, Matthew 2:1. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king. This means that Herod's reign is the most critical anchor point, and if you misplace Herod, you misplace Jesus' birth. It's as simple as that. And this is exactly where Dionysius made a foundational error. He miscalculated the years of Herod's rule. That single mistake pushed the entire AD system off by several years, creating a timeline that is historically and theologically inconsistent, a flaw that continues even today. So Dionysius concluded that Jesus was born in AD 1 and began counting the years from Jesus instead of from Diocletian. Until this point, the intention was fine. But the problem appears when we compare his calculation with the actual historical evidence. Later archaeological findings, especially the Jewish historical records and the rabbinic writings from the 6th to 7th centuries, clearly show that Herod, the king Herod, died in 4 BCE. So if Herod died in 4 BCE, then Jesus cannot be born in AD 1 because Matthew explicitly says that Jesus was born during the days of Herod. That means that the calendar was already 5 to 6 years off the mark from the very beginning, which is the most significant anchor point. Imagine you're dividing the timeline saying that this is before Christ and this is after Christ, but then there can be no compromise whatsoever on the accuracy of that anchor point, and that anchor point is wrong. Modern historians go even further. Based on multiple lines of evidence, scholars today place the birth of Jesus around 6 to 7 BC, not 1 AD. So the core issue is simple and easy to understand. Dionysius said that Jesus was born in AD 1 during Herod's reign, but Herod already died in 4 BC. Therefore, AD 1 cannot be the year of Jesus' birth. This one mistake alone shows how historically unreliable the AD system is. There are many other errors. I just picked up this one because it is easy to follow and understand. There are many other inaccuracies in the Anno Domini system. The first and the most fundamental one here is there is no year zero. Europe at the time of Dionysius simply had no mathematical concept of zero. And this creates a huge structural problem. Think of it this way. If a person is born in 2025, this year, you divide the time into before that person and after that person. The correct counting should be 2025, this year will be the birth year of that person. 2026, the year 1 after that person. And 2024, year 1 before that person. So what happens to this whole 2025, which has 365 days of the birth year itself? That should be logically year 0. But because 0 did not exist in European mathematics back then, that entire year simply disappeared in the calendar. This missing year 0 permanently distorts the timeline. And like I said, another most important and major issue is the anchor point. What you call as the year of birth of Jesus itself is wrong by 6 to 7 years. And finally, AD system has no astronomical basis. It was purely created by backtracking regnal years of the Roman emperors. So there are many other problems. I'll leave it at this. If you're interested, Read more about this. Now comes the next major step. Why BC or before Christ was invented at all? Remember, we did not talk about it till now. By 7th to 8th century CE, an English monk, Bede of Jairo, noticed a practical problem. Christianity used Anno Domini or AD to count years after Jesus' birth, but the entire Old Testament, which is like the Jewish history, which is the basis for Christian history, where do you accommodate that? The Moses, tribes of Israel, the kings of Judah, all the Jewish history that takes place before Jesus. How do you accommodate that in the timeline? To solve this, Bede introduced ante Christum natum, which means before the birth of Christ. In English, later it became before Christ BC. His methods were simple and retroactive. If AD 1 marks Jesus' birth, then everything earlier must be counted backward as BC before Christ. And that is how BC AD framework was completed. Now here is the crucial point. Even after all these calendars, the core problem never went away. The Easter kept drifting. The Christian world was unable to confidently calculate Easter because the methods were fundamentally and unfortunately inaccurate. The earlier Julian calendar, which was used in Rome, it assumed that 1 year is equal to 365.25 days. But the real solar year is 365.2422 days. A tiny difference of 11 minutes a year. And this pushed the calendar out of alignment with the real seasons. After 1200 plus years, the drift became huge. The spring equinox was no longer on March 21st. The reference point need to calculate Easter. This broke the entire Easter system. So put things simply, in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar to fix this drift. But it was done in a very blunt way. October 4th, 1582 was immediately followed by October 15th, 1582. 10 days were forcibly deleted from history. These dates simply do not exist in human history. There is no date like October 5th, 1582 or October 10th, 1582 or October 14th, 1582. All these dates were just deleted. And yet, despite this massive reform, the foundational problems remained the same. It kept the BC AD mistake created by Dionysius and Bede. It had still no year zero because Europe had no zero in mathematics when AD BC was invented. It did not fix the wrong birth year anchor of Jesus, which is already off by several years. In short, Gregorian reform corrected the astronomical drift but carried forward the intellectual and mathematical errors of AD BC. Unchanged, unquestioned, and imposed globally. This is when this calendar was started to be imposed on the rest of the world through colonization. A very important fact to note is BC AD was never a natural or universal system in our country. It was not introduced by French, it was not imposed by Dutch, it was not imposed by Portuguese. Even though all of them had their trading posts or political presence on Indian soil, they used the system for their internal calculations. It was only British who formally mandated BC AD system in Bharat, and that too very late. It's only in 1850s, barely 175 years, when they began standardizing administrative documents, revenue records, and education systems with this Gregorian calendar. Today, if you open any gazette of the Government of India, including this very one recently dated 28th November 2025, you will notice something most Indians never pay attention to. Alongside Gregorian date, there is another date, Agrahayana 7th, 1947. It is the official Shaka calendar date. Yes, Bharat uses two calendars simultaneously in official purposes. The Gregorian date is used for global alignment and administrative convenience, but for all official purposes, India also uses the Shaka calendar, our indigenous astronomical system. This dual calendar system exists because in year 1955, the then Prime Minister Nehru set up the historic calendar reforming committee, like the one which I showed in the start of this video. This decision was an outcome of that committee. Since then, every central government document carries both dates, Gregorian and Shaka. Most Indians never notice it, but it is right there in every gazette notification. And not just this, we don't use Gregorian calendar for our ritualistic or cultural purposes. Every state has their own calendar of sorts. The Tidhi, Vara, Nakshatra, the Panchanga system, which essentially talks about how do you compute a day in a year. So Gregorian calendar is more of an international standard and convention. I think that is the only best part that this forceful imposition has given us. That all of us align to one common date for administration purposes, but for the rest all, we continue to use our indigenous calendrical systems, which has more than 3000 plus years of recorded history. Before I conclude, let me highlight a fascinating fact about something that most of us might not have ever heard about. Look at the sketch on the left, Madame Mathematica. Drawn in 1508, several decades before the Gregorian calendar was even introduced. It shows two Europeans competing in mathematics. One is struggling with abacus, looking confused. The other one is calmly using the Hindu numerals, the number system of India. Why this contrast? Because by 13th to 15th centuries, Europe was in middle of a mathematical revolution. A revolution triggered by Leonardo of Pisa, also known as Fibonacci. Remember the Fibonacci series that you may have solved in your high school or plus 2? In 1200, Fibonacci introduced the Hindu numeral system to Europe, openly crediting India in his book Liber Abaci. This single adoption transformed Europe's scientific and economic life forever. And here is the point what I want to make. If something has real value, you never need to impose it. People will embrace it on their own. India never imposed its numeral systems on Europe. Europe adopted it voluntarily because it worked, it had value. But the Gregorian calendar, imposed through force and decree, never replaced people's cultural calendars. Even today, across the world, including in Bharat, communities still follow their indigenous calendrical traditions alongside the Gregorian one. This is not about superiority, this is not about nationalism, it is simply a reminder of a universal truth. Value spreads naturally, imposition never lasts. It could be a calendar, or could be a religion. People just will dump it if it's not of any value. Well, the need to calculate Easter accurately also made calculus, one of the most sophisticated branches of mathematics, travel from Bharat towards Europe. Even before Newton and Leibniz quote-unquote invented calculus, in 1300s itself, Madhava from the Kerala School of Astronomy, he's the one who laid foundation for calculus. I think I covered in great detail about this journey of calculus from Bharat to Europe in many of my videos. So I'll not repeat that. I just want to show the timeline of the events. If you're interested, you can research on your own or take a screenshot of this, throw it into ChatGPT and see the facts for yourself. And this was not made by ChatGPT, by the way. I struggled to construct this timeline 5 years back. So there was a video of mine some 5 years ago to go through multiple sources and make this video. I think it is called as the history of calculus in Bharat or something like that. You can find it on the channel. So that's the story in brief about how BC AD system was built, why it contains deep inaccuracies and how it eventually fell out of use. Over the last 30-40 years or even before that, scholars, educators and institutions around the world have openly recognized three major issues: scientific inaccuracies, historical inconsistencies, and cultural and religious bias. Well, if Diocletian's persecution of Christians made them to abandon Diocletian's identity and start the counter from Jesus, well then, the forceful imposition of British on India about the Gregorian calendar should also follow the same logic, because British also persecuted Indians very badly. So the same logic applies here as well. Well, that's fine. More importantly, as a result, BC and AD were dropped in most academic and global contexts. They were replaced with BCE, before Common Era, and CE, Common Era. A neutral, inclusive, scientifically appropriate system that does not contain any privilege to one culture. And the core message is every civilization, whether Indian, Egyptian, Chinese, Persian, Greek, African, or European, has its own rich tradition of timekeeping. They deserve respect, not replacement. Do not impose anything on anyone, not a religion, not a calendar. If something has true value, it will be naturally accepted. If not, no amount of force can make it meaningful and people will reject it, whether it is a calendar or a religion. If artificial intelligence, AI, is something that you're working with, learning about, or simply curious to explore, I also run another YouTube channel called Sensei. There I publish bite-sized videos which are like easy explainers about various AI concepts. Do visit the channel, and if you feel that I'm talking sense and is of value to you, do consider subscribing. It helps me a lot. And as always, thanks for watching.